I'm gonna move. My daughter's in my office.
Okay.
So you're good to open, you're okay? You're good to open?
Yeah.
To carry the meeting?
Yep.
You good? Yay, Colleen. Okay. How was the retreat?
It was good. It was really
Good.
good. Yeah. Let me just put this in presenter. Presenter view. Present.
So the only thing I'm speaking to is a tutoring program. And and the systems abuse report, and then I've already told Charlene I'll throw to her.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we go to Rohan.
View, slideshow. Can you see everything perfectly?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just do one more thing. See if I can do it in presenter view.
I need my office. Just give me a second. I'll be back.
Okay. All right.
Mariana, are you done? Sorry, are you finished? Hi, Melissa. Yeah. So is Ariana done? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we'll do that. I'll print them out and then we'll do some practice as well. Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. All right, thank you. Bye. Say bye, Ari. Bye. Okay, you gotta go. I have a yes. No, it's 7 o'clock. Claire's not home. No, you can watch something. You can't go outside. Put your book away so you have it for next week, please. You can play tomorrow. Sure. Hold on. Did you do your homework? Yeah. Let me see it. Jeez Louise, like I live in a pigsty. My house is a mess.
That's okay. I'm gonna have to share. So Robin didn't send me anything to present.
Pardon?
Robin didn't send me anything to present.
Well, hopefully she.
But Rohan.
Rohan sent it to you?
He didn't, but he asked to give him permission to share his.
Sure. Maybe Robin will do the same thing.
We let people in. Let's wait a minute.
Got Rohan in.
Okay.
Anyone from our team? I'm gonna just close my door. I just need a minute.
No problem. Hi, Rohan.
Hi, Colleen. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
We're just gonna wait a bit and then start adding everybody in.
Sure, no problem. So I'm going to, I guess, share my screen, right? And I'll let people know, but then I'll look away from time to time because then I'm working off of another screen as well. So
No problem.
yeah.
Sounds good.
Hi, Rohan.
Hey, Kiri, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good. Just
Awesome.
watching you bonfire on Waterloo region.
Waterloo, that director, she's something else, like just dirty, just dirty.
Yeah, and then the next one, the Lisa D'Amato, she is classic racist over there.
That's the Waterloo director, right?
No, the one who wrote the record article.
Oh, her. Yeah, what was that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She once wrote an article that defended and basically called everybody crazy in Waterloo region who protested Faith Goldie. And Faith Goldie was supposed to come and give a talk at one of the universities. And so anyways, that's who Luisa D'Amato is.
Oh my God. Well, there's some real issues out there. I mean, it's everywhere, but still, yes, you can. Close the door, please. Anyway.
But you guys are doing a great job with them. So
I don't know. I saw, Charlene's in the waiting room.
I don't see her.
Maybe under Systems Navigator. I saw, I'm gonna message everyone and just say we're gonna start in 5 minutes. I saw an article, the Waterloo region, so today, the Waterloo Record, today they had an article written by a Black board member, and it was good. Like she talked about just what she hopes is her child, her black biracial son enters into, oh God, Charlene's in a Google Meet.
Oh,
Charlene needs some support.
I hope Robin's not in there either. Let me forward it again.
I sent Robin the Zoom.
Okay.
So Colleen, I think you said I have 30 minutes?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Robin is in the waiting room. Can we add her in?
Sure.
And then let me just send Charlene. Okay. Anyway, the Waterloo Record. So they had this article today that it was pretty okay. It was about this Black mom, what she was saying she hopes for her son as he enters into kindergarten. And as I'm reading it, I went back and I looked, and the director had wrote an opinion piece saying that the public deserves to know why the police was called on a 4-year-old. And I wasn't able to read it because they locked it, like you have to subscribe. So I'm going to subscribe and read it later, but what the hell? So that's how they're getting around the fact that they can't make the report public. She wants to defend, like they're leaning on the fact that the ministry says we need to do X, Y, and Z, but the ministry doesn't say you have to call the police. They never said that. And in fact, they recommend that you don't for kids 12 and under. So it's nuts.
Yeah, and they're continuing, like, you know, they're trying to suck and blow at the same time. So we understand anti-Blackness, and it's, but we got to call the police on these Black children, though.
Exactly. There's Charlene, I'll let her in. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Yeah. So I'm going to go back and read it. But that woman, like, she needs to go. She needs to go.
Hi,
Hi,
Robin.
Robin.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Nice to
How are
see
you
you all.
doing?
I'm doing well.
We were just talking about the 4-year-old out in Waterloo, where they called the police on a 4-year-old. Anyway,
It's just not nonstop, hey?
it's craziness. Hey, Charlene.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
Okay, so
Jennifer.
sorry.
Let's let everyone in.
Let's let everyone in. Colleen is going to lead the meeting. I always feel like we should have music or something at the beginning.
I'm admitting people now.
For help, press 0.
Welcome, everybody, to today's quarterly meeting. If I can just ask for everyone to make sure they are on mute. We're just going to start in a minute or two. Okay, so I will begin. So welcome again, everybody. We're going to start today with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we are all meeting is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers. We also acknowledge those of us who were brought here forcibly as a result of the transatlantic enslavement. We honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. We occupy stolen land at the displacement of Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the ancestors of this land as Ontario's many systems continue to administer and exercise colonial power in Indigenous and racialized communities. It is important to reflect about what has happened, is happening, and what changes can be made going forward to further reconciliation. So for tonight's agenda, we're going to begin with going through our tutoring program and kind of letting you guys know some of the updates, as well as our parent mentorship program. I'll be walking you guys through some of the things that we're currently working on. We have a guest speaker, Robin, who will be speaking about policing Black lives. We will also go through our systems abuse report. Our systems navigator, Charlene, will help us and walk us through that. And then we have another guest speaker, Rohan, who will talk about trauma in Black students. So to begin, I'm going to introduce Kiri. Kiri, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead, and she'll be discussing more about the tutoring program.
Thank you. Thanks, Colleen. It's great to see everyone on the call. It's been a while since we've done one of these meetings, so it's nice to be back together. And our hope is that when we do the next one, that we'll be able to have a hybrid version where we're in person and online at the same time. So my name's Kiri Daniel. I'm one of the co-founders of Parents of Black Children and the executive director for the organization. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the tutoring program. So we run, we have two tutoring programs that we have been able to run. One of them with 60 students that have been participating in the program for over a year. So we've been able to see the progression of the kids that are in that program. And they're doing quite well. And we're hoping that we're able to maintain and sustain that program through funding. It allows students 2 hours a week of tutoring. And we're seeing the increase in confidence levels and the improvement in academic outcomes. So that's what we're hoping to continue. We also want to share that our virtual campus is still accessible. So if you have students who want to check it out, you can still access our virtual campus. You can go onto our website and download the campus. And we have drop-in homework help. So if you're not part of the tutoring program, but you have a student that has a problem with math, or they have an English paper that they need a little bit of assistance with, we have a drop-in homework help where you can sign up that day and you get half an hour with a tutor to help with that particular assignment. So please, continue to look into that, to support it, and visit the campus. So I'll leave it at that. If there are questions, we can answer questions about the tutoring program at the end. We do have a wait list for the program, but if you're interested, you can email us and we will add your name onto that list. We can move to the next slide, Colleen.
Thank you, Kiri, and thank you for introducing yourself, because I forgot that I didn't introduce myself. So I am Colleen. I'm the program manager for the United Parents Project. And so I'll be giving a little bit of an update, a really quick, brief update on our parent mentorship program, which is a part of the United Parents Program. So we've had a big increase in parents joining the program, which has been amazing. With new parents comes new knowledge, new stories, and ways to help other parents within the program. So we have meetings once a month. And we are finally going to have our first in-person meeting, which is really exciting. We'll get all the parents together with their children as well, which is super exciting, especially with COVID in the last few years, feeling a little bit isolated. It's really nice to come together for the first time. And then right now we're also in the works of developing a mentorship booklet for parents. Since we do only meet once a month, it's important to have a tool where you can journal and document some of the things you're going through that could be beneficial to bring at our next meeting. So yeah, it's been a really exciting time. We're really excited to have new parents joining. Unfortunately, we are full at the moment, but in September, we will be open to accepting more parents to join the program. So stay tuned and keep updated on what's to come. We'll be sharing if spaces are available going forward. So next we have our guest speaker, one of our guest speakers, Robin, who's an author, and she will be talking about policing Black lives. So Robin, whenever you're ready, you can jump on and introduce yourself.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me. I have my son in the other room, hopefully reading, so he may pop in now and again, but I just want to say my name is Robin Maynard. I'm the author of Policing Black Lives, and I'm also the co-author of a forthcoming book called Rehearsals for Living. I am such a huge fangirl of Parents for Black Children. I think that the work that you have done and are doing is so crucial, is so life-affirming, is so life-changing for so many of our Black kids. So as myself a parent, and being a parent, one of the reasons, that I wrote this book to try to change and end policing of Black families, of Black kids more broadly, it really means a lot for me to be here. So I'm just going to speak for not too long about some of the work and the research that I've done in policing Black lives that speaks to the realities of anti-Blackness and in the education system, the surveillance and policing of Black young people in particular, and also just end on looking at some of the really exciting work, giving shout outs to parents of Black children, as well as many others who are doing some of this work to actually change things and make livable futures for our kids. So we were just speaking before the Zoom got started about, this news of the 4-year-old, again, being escorted by police in Waterloo. When I'd originally written Policing Black Lives, it actually opened, of course, with the horrific story of the 6-year-old girl who had her hands and ankles cuffed together in handcuffs in her school. So what this points to, and these situations that we continue to find our children in time and time again, are that in the eyes of the white society and the state institutions, including in educational institutions that we live in, Black children are so often not conceived of as children and are often attributed with the supernatural abilities, dangerous abilities far beyond their age, their size, and their physical capabilities, due to the enduring realities of anti-Blackness. In that particular case of this 6-year-old girl, of course, the school officials issued no immediate apology. Sergeant Coley told the media that it was disgusting that this behavior could be seen as racist, right? So that again highlights the fact that how normalized routine violence is against Black kids within the school system. So even though education, as all of us understand it, and I think really believe this for our children as Black families have for generations and generations, education is understood to be one of the bedrocks of our society, understood as a social good, as a place in which young people's minds and relationships are supposed to be developed towards becoming adults. But we know that for our own kids, for Black students, schools are often places where young Black people are experiencing harm, psychological violence, and of course, sometimes even the very real physical violence of arrest, for example, by police in these institutions. Hang on, the sun's setting. I'm just going to turn on a lamp. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So schools across Canada, whether that's Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, British Columbia, are permeated with anti-Blackness. And schools, in fact, are often our kids' first encounter with the systemic devaluation of Blackness that's part of the broader society that we live in. Another way of thinking about how education has actually evolved in Canada is, and I talk about this in my book, Policing Black Lives, is thinking about education policy as something that has been functioning as a tool towards white supremacy. So there was an Ontario school trustee who'd actually said at one point, it was better to cut their children's heads off than throw them in the ditch than have them go to school with, they use the N-word here, right? And this is to justify ongoing segregation in Ontario. Of course, hundreds of years ago, after the abolition of slavery, when Canada is supposed to be the end of the Underground Railroad, we already have an education system that's fundamentally not seeing Black children as students, right? So this is important because we often hear the media or pundits talking about this thing where, because of immigration, we suddenly have this reality of Black kids in schools, and what do we do? But if we look back to the legacy of slavery, to the legacy of segregation, which in Canada, of course, existed until 1983 in Nova Scotia, 1965, the last segregated school closed in Ontario. We're dealing with an age-old problem. We're dealing with a centuries-old problem that has its history in the fact that Black children in this province, in this country, were once considered chattel, were once considered property, were once sexually sold separately from their parents, as punishment for families. So as much as we're always told that, this is now somehow understood as an issue of immigration, or what do we do with these Black kids from elsewhere, this is a very Canadian reality. This is a uniquely Canadian reality that is not being exported from the United States, even though we're often told as Black parents that we're, importing an American point of view and understanding the kinds of racism that we're seeing in our schools. So slavery, followed by by decades of segregation in the school system, has left an indelible legacy of racism in public and private Canadian education institutions. And there's a visible and lasting inequity between Black and white students' education in Canada because of this. So of course, after segregation, I'm just giving it, a teeny history lesson. We can see that we see a continuation of what I call in the book, the miseducation of Black youth, where Black students were being pushed out of school, being given lower grades, being failed and pushed out more broadly. So this shows that education has remained even in an era of formal desegregation, right? Where now we have, of course, multiracial kids going to our schools in the TDSB and the PDSB and the YRDSB, and across the country, of course. But what we continue to see is, realities that so many of us are familiar with, right? The streaming of Black students, the disproportionate expulsion and suspension and suspicion of Black students, the reporting of Black parents through the school system as well, that we see the kinds of surveillance and what I really think we can consider the policing of Black kids broadly within the school system. So Black young people continue to be disproportionately streamed into lower education tracks. We know this is part of individual prejudice as well as systemic factors, where there's racial stereotypes held by teachers playing an important role in streaming, where teachers are often making assumptions about Black kids' ability to learn, telling Black kids, of course, inserting their own ideas into telling Black kids about what their futures can look like. Black students in Alberta, in a recent survey that came out, talked about Black students being given the silent treatment, for example, or their teachers trying to dissuade them from higher education. So as much as we can say it's systemic, it's also really important to highlight it's also racist individual teachers a lot of the time too, right? So it's when we say systemic, it's not to absolve the very real reality of the fact that there are, while there are amazing teachers working within the system to make important change, there is an egregious issue of racism that goes beyond the systemic that sometimes really is as well this. So we have, kids being told that a Black kid can't study to become a doctor, and issues like this as well. YRDSB just put out, a survey in 2020 that showed that Black students continue to name that teachers assume they're less intelligent, and they're experiencing differential treatment based on race with negative assumptions around their academic abilities being an ongoing issue. So I'm actually rewriting and re-researching this chapter in particular on the miseducation of Black youth to just demonstrate how little has changed, even though we've seen some substantive legislative shifts since my book was published in 2017, that 5 years later, we're still seeing so many of these rampant issues. So Black students are being streamed into lower track education programs, being disproportionately assigned to in Canada, in Quebec, what are called the SHSMLD programs that's sort of a long acronym about children being at risk. There's often Caribbean kids from the Caribbean, even French-speaking Black children from Haiti being put in the welcoming classes as if they don't speak French in Quebec, even though they're migrants who, of course, have spoken French their entire lives. And we see similar issues here about these welcoming classes. I was just talking to a friend of mine from Zimbabwe who was saying she was put in English second language courses when she migrated to the United States, right? Even though, of course, Zimbabwe, again, is an Anglophone country. So this idea that Black children are somehow always from elsewhere, even when they're speaking and educated in the same languages. In 2015, there was a random sample taken of students placed in what are called their individual program plans that showed that Black students were 13% of the student body, but were only 3% of those who were labeled gifted and really disproportionately, again, labeled within the IPP program. So this idea of streaming, I think, is really important, even though now that they're trying to actually, to get rid of it, that we continue to see some of these realities still playing out today. I'm trying to streamline what I wanted to say because I'm realizing I've already been talking for 10 minutes. So I'm going to move past streaming because I just want to, again, get into the reality of school discipline policies and racialized surveillance and punishment, because I think it's important, to understand the broader context, again, of what I just really always want to highlight is we're often taught, both as parents and as young people, that we are somehow bringing this individual deficit, that when we name a problem, that we are the problem. So I think it's really important. I don't like to dwell too much on systemic racism and violence all the time, but it's so important to understand how systemic of a reality this is in the Canadian system, because that actually gives us the power to say, that, we as individuals are not the issue, that we are coming up against a system of violence where our kids are being placed in a violent institution. So again, that's why I'm really focusing on so much of these structural issues, even though I think many of us are aware in the day-to-day reality of what our kids are going through. So just to give a little bit of context, but we know that, our kids in schools are not only treated like they're inferior, but also treated as if they're a threat. Right. So the presence of Black children often being unwelcome and undesirable, with Canadian public schools using school disciplinary policies that are cementing, the pushing out of Black children. So schools are becoming an increasingly carceral and punitive place for students, and Black students have likened their treatment by school officials to their experience with police. Hey, Lamar, I'm busy right now. Just 1 second.
While Robin deals with her little boy, I just, I'm hoping she can hear, but just offering a sincere thank you. Robin has been, I think when we first started Parents of Black Children, we had actually reached out to her. She reminded me today to be part of our advisory committee, because we were thinking about doing an advisory at the time. But every time we've asked her to speak or to be somewhere, she's always there. So, thank you, Robin, for that.
Thank you so much. And yeah, again, thank you for having me. That was just my son, this is very close to my heart, parenting a child at this time. I know we're all parents here, so yeah, forgive the interruption there. And thanks so much, Carrie. So, in 2020, again, in the Peel District School Board, a study found that just in the preceding year, Black secondary students, who were 10% of the school population, were 22.5% of suspensions. So again, when people say the issues being dealt with, we know, again, this is 5 years after I wrote my book, that we're still, again, dealing with so many of these same issues. In 2017 in TDSB, 42% of Black students had been suspended at least once, compared to 18% of white students, and 18% of other racialized students. I think is important to notice that this is also happening with young children. I think really matters as well, though again, we're starting to see some shifts in terms of just trying to move away from this kind of punishment in the school system more broadly. In the TDSB, of course, because of generations of activism by Black parents, by Black communities. Something else that I think is just crucial to highlight is how much, we are starting to see some really important shifts, especially in Ontario, that I think are crucial. And rather than, I think, thanking the school boards for being enlightened or benevolent, we really need to look at the really hard work that parents have done, that Black communities have done to actually to force these changes, right? To actually be the leaders, to be the disruptors, to do that fearless work. Like my hosts here for this meeting, like Leroy Newbold and Nuda Robinson of Freedom School, and so many others who've been, the crank in the wheel that force these changes to happen. Yeah, let me see. What else did I want to mention? Just really quickly, I wanted to highlight, I talked about a little bit about how surveillance in schools in terms of suspension and expulsion creates a kind of something that's like policing of students, because they're being so heavily watched by teachers, because they're being so heavily watched by educators. But something that's so important, that the story that I'd opened with, that we opened this workshop speaking about, is the fact that in some instances, of course, Black teachers or police are actually being called in, right? So we can say that school is another site of policing of Black children just because of the way they're being watched, because of the way that they're being, sent home for things like earrings, the way that they're being called aggressive, the way that they're being called dangerous at these disproportionate rates. But we actually, of course, have the real presence of police in schools, whether that's the school resource office program, which of course is now finally no longer present in the TDSB. And is slowly being removed from other places across the school, but that the actual presence of police in schools is, again, something that can really negatively impact the life of Black children, because we know how Black people are, disproportionately stopped, arrested, carded across the Black community and across many ages. So Black legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw says, it's well established in the research literature and by educational advocates that there's a link between the use of punitive disciplinary measures and subsequent patterns of criminal supervision and incarceration. So this is already true about the heightened disciplining of Black children, but becomes particularly true when we actually have the presence of police in schools, literally criminalizing Black children in the places where they're supposed to learn. I wanted to speak a little bit about the way that Black students are being pushed out and understood as, as having an attitude in the way they're treated by their students or by their teachers, excuse me. But I think I'm going to move on, realizing just the time sensitiveness of this, because I'd been supposed to speak for 15 minutes. So I want to just conclude by talking about, again, something that's very crucial to me personally, that I know is probably very crucial to many of you, fighting back, fighting to win. So I touched on this a little bit before, but decades after the integration of Canada's last segregated school, Black students were still being pushed out and streamed into poverty, but at this and streamed out of schools. But Black families have been, since slavery, of course, fighting to try to keep their families together from the violence of the institution of slavery. And even in the time of segregated schooling, we had Black teachers like Mary Bibb and others who were fighting for the education of Black young people, at times educating white children as well. Right. So this is something that, again, we can see that as long as there has been this institutional violence, we've seen Black families, Black educators always fighting for change. So despite enormous obstacles, Black family has worked toward finding ways to educate, formally or informally, never passively accepting segregation in schools, but actively contesting it until it ended. Even schools founded specifically to remedy anti-Blackness, which we see in Toronto and Halifax, only exist because of decades, again, of concerted organizing. So young Black people have also taken enormous risks to resist the racial harms that they've seen in schools. In fall of 2020, several hundred Black students walked out of schools in Calgary, protesting multiple incidents of teachers using the N-word while talking to students. They were also talking about the erasure of Black history from their schools, and many of them walked from their school to Calgary Police Headquarters chanting Black Lives Matter. In Dartmouth's Prince Andrew High School, dozens of students staged a Black Lives Matter walkout in November 2020 to highlight endemic racism from fellow students and demanded an expanded commitment on Black culture and Black history. That same fall, another walkout organized in the GTA by Student Speak Up YCDSB saw students demanding more hiring of Black teachers, mandatory anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism training, and a mechanism to allow them to report racism at York's Catholic School Board. So I also just really want to highlight the really crucial role of organizing to get police out of schools, which I'd alluded to. Of course, there's the historic RIN organized by Toronto Freedom School, Black Lives Matter Toronto, and and Education Not Incarceration, who led a successful struggle to remove student resource officers, police, from the country's largest school board. And in 2020, of course, Black students organizing to get police out of schools in Hamilton. After a Black ESL student was dragged out of a Hamilton area school in handcuffs, the high school students in Hamilton Students for Justice staged an 8-hour sit-in and an ongoing campaign to terminate the Police in Schools program, which was victorious with a school board vote in their favor in 2020. So there's been a Cops Out of School campaign led by the Asilu Collective in Ottawa Carleton School Board, and a vote to end SRO programs in the Peel region after a powerful campaign by parents of Black children, of course, led by Claudette Rutherford, Carrie Daniel, Charlene Grant, and many others. So I just want, again, to highlight that the kinds of wins that we're seeing are happening because of a refusal to accept racial violence, a refusal to accept the idea that our children are worth less, a refusal to accept the idea that our children don't deserve to have a decent and powerful education. So today, the presence of law enforcement in places ostensibly geared towards learning is becoming increasingly morally indefensible, as we're seeing this across the border. This call and this movement has been taken up across the United States as well. And we're seeing a massive police-free schools movement that is quite successful in this time, and hopefully relegating a time in which armed and violent agents of the state are present in schools can be an embarrassing and shameful chapter in our history. So the last thing that I wanted to say, is that challenging harms spanning curricula to disciplinary policies to cops in classrooms, Black communities are on the vanguard across this country and really across North America in terms of making life making changes to education, challenging the miseducation of Black youth with children, teenagers, parents, teachers, community members, building more liberatory futures, not just for young Black people in schools, but really for all young people. So it's from these movements that we can see the truth in the maxim that change comes from below. As we see those in power, really ought to take note of the fact that these changes are on their way, and whether or not they're ready, it's happening before our eyes. So I just want to end this with a big thank you to all the Black parents present, to everybody who in big or small ways has interrupted the ongoing 400-year struggle against anti-Blackness in schooling in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin, again, for supporting parents of Black children and for the work that you do. Without your research and efforts, change won't be possible. So we really do appreciate you for joining us today. We're going to just create some space for questions. If anyone has any quick questions, just pop them in the chat and we will get Robin to answer some of them. So there's someone asking if you could state stats on suspensions again. I think you went through suspensions.
Absolutely, just a moment. Sure, I can give plenty of statistics on this. So in Toronto, between 2011 and 2016, almost half of the students expelled from the TDSB were Black, and only 10% of those expelled were white students. During 2006 to 2007, Black students in Toronto were 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students. The one that I had cited earlier was in the Peel District School Board, a 2020 study found that in the preceding year, Black secondary students made up 10% of the school population, but 22.5% of suspensions. And Black students and parents highlighted in a really great report that came out that teachers were using, as they said, any excuse to exclude Black students, including wearing hoodies, including hoop earrings. And another stat that I had mentioned was that in the TDSB, in a study by Carl James and the fabulous Tana Turner, nearly 42% of all Black students had been suspended at least once, compared to 18% of white students and 18% of other racialized students.
Thank you.
I see this next question. How are you able to connect Indigenous, First Nations, and Native people's history to that of Black people's? So that's something that I definitely didn't do in the talk today, but is very much an important part of the work that I do, and is part of the work in Policing Black Lives that actually goes on to break down, when talking about the legacy of white supremacy in Canadian schools, also looks at, of course, the crucial reality of, you can't talk about white supremacy in Canadian schools without looking at the egregious, violent reality of residential schools, right? Of pulling Black children from their homes. We're still finding, hey, Lamar, I need 3 more minutes, okay? Then bedtime? Bedtime? Well, then you're gonna finish and then bedtime. Okay. Just a second.
So again, just calling for questions. Robin won't be here the whole meeting. So this is the time to ask any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Colleen. Yeah, so I was just, wanted to conclude on saying that, of course, the violent legacy of residential schools, I think, is a very different kind of violence, the violence of genocide and of mass child removal. Of course, we've seen the removal of Black children from families in the child welfare system as well. So that these are interconnected kinds of racial violence that are part of how this country has been founded and part of how this country continues to function. So we're seeing the mass, the push out, the heightened discipline of our students is related to the kind of violence and harms experienced by Indigenous students, both historically and in the present day. Let's see.
Maybe one more question?
Yeah, I have time for one more question, then I have to.
No problem.
Okay, so about this.
Use this.
Go join.
No.
Okay, so I will just look at perhaps one last question. The question of reform versus liberation, because I think this is a crucial way for thinking about social change, because some really valuable people have put together a chart that I find really helpful in the United States. I'll try to send it out right before I have to run, but on the difference between reformist reforms and non-reformist reforms. And I think this is so helpful. So if we think about liberation as the end goal, which I think for our Black children, for Black kids, of course, means the freedom to not be policed in schools, of course, means the of being actually respected and being treated humanely, means, you know, realities about Black, queer, and trans kids also being a part of education, to think about really what a liberated education could be, right? But what does it take to get there? Of course, you know, a lot of this work that I do, for example, around policing, you can ask, does this work to retrench and make stronger the system that we're trying to fight? Or does it actually move power away from violent systems? So for example, an example of a non-reformist reform, a reform that doesn't move toward liberation, is of course giving more money, to example, for police to do more anti-racism trainings. When we've seen that all that does is increase policing budgets and doesn't actually change the way that they treat Black communities, because policing is historically created to, you know, to police Black and Indigenous communities. But if we think about something that is not working against liberation, we could say, for example, taking the money that would have gone into SROs and actually funneling that into after school programs for Black kids, right? That moves money away from a punitive institution and moves money away from surveillance into something that is actually building, that is actually, again, interrupting harm. So those are some of the ways that I think we can say not all reforms are helpful, but some are. So we need to look at, is this giving more or less power to the institutions that we are trying to fight?
Thank you so much, Robin, again.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. So next, we're gonna have Charlene talk about our systems abuse report, as well as I think Curie will kind of chime in as well. So whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
I can start and then I can throw it to Charlene. So we launched a systems abuse report. It feels like a couple weeks ago. It's probably been a little bit longer than that now. The report it took a look at all of the data that we have collected since we started the systems navigation role and team that Charlene leads and occupies. And you know, we took that data, we looked at what was happening for our families, but did a bit of analysis with that, along with we had also launched a school racism reporting tool that encouraged educators and people working in the system to report the racism that they were experiencing or that they were seeing, because we know it's happening for our kids, but it's also happening for educators who are working, Black educators who are working in the system, and in fact, white and other racialized educators who are working on behalf of Black families or speaking up on behalf of Black families are also finding that they were being targeted as well. And so we wanted to track that. And so using those two forms of data, we put together this report where we kind of codified what was happening. You know, we saw some common themes around you know, the racism that our kids are experiencing. We identified some areas of concern. Simcoe was one of those locations where we see a high number of cases that come to us. And also areas that we're watching, like Halton region, where we're getting alarms, like people are raising the alarm out in Halton about what's happening for Black kids out there. So the report went into all of that. It's accessible on our website. And we also collected, so we submitted that report to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And we collected 62 impact statements, I'm sure for many of you on the call as well, and submitted those to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Can we go to the next slide, Colleen? So what we're asking is for the commission to launch an inquiry into anti-Black racism within Ontario's education system. Robin touched on the fact that the work that PoBC is doing is not new. We stand on the shoulders of so many people, including organizations that we work alongside, like Advocacy Peel, who did the work out in Peel Region with policing. But yes, so we stand on the shoulders of all of these organizations. There was an organization of a similar name, Parents of Black Children, that existed before we even were a thought. And they were doing the exact same work. And there are many advocates who've been doing this work. But there's never been a report solely dedicated to the experiences of Black children in the Ontario education system. There has been human rights reports where Black kids are featured as part of the larger story, or there have been human rights inquiries that look at very specific areas like suspension and expulsion, but never the full picture. And that's what we're asking from the OHRC. What we'll say, and I'm going to throw it to Charlene after this, is that the Ontario Human Rights Commission has been less than receptive to opening an inquiry. So we would ask for families, for parents to write to them, let them know that how you feel about it, that you'd like an inquiry, that you want your voice heard, that you want it on the record, because this is something our stories deserve to be told, and our experiences deserve to be documented at the highest level. It shouldn't take an organization like us to collect these stories and do that documenting work. We need that to come from, the government and the commission whose task it is to be responsible for upholding our human rights. We need it to come from them, and we need those recommendations to be solidified from a commission. So I'll leave it at that. I'm going to pass it on to Charlene to talk a little bit more about her thoughts on the report, but also some of the areas of trauma. Why we wanted Rohan to come and speak to all of you is because what we're seeing in that report is the trauma that our kids are experiencing, and often as parents don't see it or we don't know, right? So I'll leave it there, and Charlene, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Good night. So my name is Charlene Grant. Thanks, Carrie. And I am also one of the co-founders and the Chief Advocacy Officer. I often like to say what that really means. I get a front row seat to our parents' abuse, what their children are going through, their agony. The system is abusing our children. And parents come to us and we advocate with them, fight with them, for them, any which way we can. What we see on a daily basis is how the education system, along with child welfare system, and along with the criminal justice system, the police, how they're all in collusion and they all rally around each other to support each other while our children are being abused. I'm going to Carrie touched on the Human Rights Commissioner Office. If I could, I know why Carrie's asking me to do it because she knows I'm going to be blunt. If I could give you guys a window into what we're experiencing, pretty much we're being told for the inquiry to be done, what's the purpose, right? When I hear those answers coming from a commissioner of human rights, all I think about, if there's no purpose, then why do you have that job? Why are you there? Because your whole job is to hold up human rights. And I don't know if it's political, but it's an election year, guys. And now is the time, none of these government wants any scandal. And we're saying no one has ever cared about Black students. We, parents, have made them care. And is what we're asking for. We got 62 impact statements, and I know why. There's a reason why it's so low, because I myself didn't even do one, and I've had many experiences with my children. I know Carrie didn't do ours. It's reliving the trauma. Ron is going to talk about what that does to our bodies and our children and our families. It affects everyone in your household. I could give you examples for what we have seen. One of the most egregious example I've seen of the trauma that a child experiences after he has experienced racial violence at school. He's 9. Woke up one day blind and couldn't move. His body gave way. He was blind for 2 weeks. I kid you not. I can't even make this up. When he went to the doctor with his mother, the doctor questioned her parenting. Why? Of course, she's Black. So the doctor questioned her parenting because it had to have been something the parent is doing at home. And when the mom started explaining some of the things that was happening to him at school, then she said, that is it. He's stressed and he's traumatized. It will come back. He got his sight back. Don't get me wrong. He did. But I always look at that and I think about what is that doing to our children who is not able to speak. I did a presentation, my team and I did a presentation to a group of parents with children with autism. And when I heard the stories of how the neglect and the abuse that they were experiencing was unheard of, we ended the call and about 8 of those parents reached out immediately for support. There was about 11 of them on the call. Our families are not our children. I know Robin touched on it, because when I heard about the examples of the 4-year-old in Waterloo, and I sat there and listened to that racist principal described him and describe what he did with the officer or officers, I looked at her and I said, you just described Superman and he's 4. Or I don't know, Spider-Man, the kind of powers she was given this 4-year-old, like had to have been Superman, because she said the police came and he was fighting the police called for backup and the backup called for backup. The report now showed us that was a lie. We have the report. And now this little boy is 4, and I'm going to touch on him for a little bit. And what we're seeing, and I know this is Rowan's area, but I'm learning some of this just from the experience. What that little boy is doing in his new environment, that he's a little bit safer, he's telling his story based on his triggers. And I liken it at, this is just my words, I liken it onto him detoxing from the trauma, because the things that he's telling with just his experience in his new environment shows the level of violence a 4-year-old experience in the education system. This is wrong. And these people, these educators who have inflicted such harm on our children should be in jail. And when a commissioner of human rights would look at a report like that and tell us we should go back and think of another way other than an inquiry. Because here's what we're looking for. We know child welfare had an inquiry. And there was the One Vision, One Voice, and there was a blueprint made. I think I saw Kike's name on here, that led that team in the One Vision, One Voice, which is a provincial approach in how to deal with the child welfare and abuse in the child welfare system. We need the same thing. We need a provincial approach to education and the treatment of our Black children. And when I hear the commissioner pretty much show us aside in her statement or in her lack of actions, it makes us creative and it makes us go to other means, because we are going to get that, because our children's life depends on it. I know there's an inquiry in policing right now. There's been many studies, because you and I know, and folks on here, until we tell our stories or until these things are captured on camera, or someone else tells it for us, or it has to be out there, it looks like we're the complainers and we're just making this thing up. I was doing a training this week, my business, and one of the executive in the meeting said, I don't believe educators are racist. I don't believe they will do X, Y, and Z. It's the worst thing he could have said to me, because the navigator, Charlene, came out. I forgot I was training, actually. And I just started giving him all the experiences I could think of, like just roll off my tongue. Not another word was said, because that is it. Listen, our history have not been lying and going and capturing or kidnapping people from their country and colonizing. That's not been our history. We've always been the people of truth. So much so we tell on ourselves all the time. I see it with our children. How many times educators have said to me about the Black children when they come to their office, oh, they're so truthful. They are so honest. Of course they are. It's who they are. There's nothing wrong with them. It's your system that's wrong. We're dealing with a case recently, like within the last couple of days. And this is not new, and it's not new for this board because there's already a lawsuit. And I got to give you guys the examples because I think the examples are what let you see a window into some of the things we're experiencing. This little girl, little Black girl, teenager, she actually wrote me my first time ever getting a letter from a student. Normally it's the parents that reach out to me or siblings off. And she wrote me to tell me she was sexually assaulted. The school have yet to call the police. They know who it is. The person have yet to be suspended or expelled. And what is happening now is that same white boy is getting all his friends to harass this girl. And then they tell the mother when she goes there and display her trauma that we don't speak like that here. That same school board, today I think I got the letter, called the police on a 9-year-old boy. Quick. Like there's no hesitation. Because you know why that happens? Because those are their friends. They're in partnership. That's the blueprint that they have. We all rally and support each other. A little 9-year-old, I think we did it recently when we launched one of our many press conferences that we did. A 9-year-old boy was assaulted by an adult at school. When the mother reported, the police pretty much shoot her away. I have at least 5 of those stories where our children are the victim and the parents go in to report, and their report are not taken seriously until we get involved. Again, the system is not designed to see us as victims or that we're targeted. This is why we focus our thing on systems abuse. The system abuse our children, and child welfare, child protection services is silent and complicit in the assault and the abuse of our children, because I've yet to hear any of them come out publicly and speak on this. But yet, our children could say something, and an educator will say, I thought I heard them say this, and call CAS immediately. In the 4-year-old case in Waterloo, they called the mom, and when they didn't get the mom, they called the police they gave the mom 15 minutes. In the report, it said they took half an hour before they called the police. There was nothing unusual about the boy that day. The report tells us that. In fact, he was calm. And these are the things that happen. And when we tell them, it makes it seem like they're isolated incidences, but they're not. It happens every day. And it's just a matter of time until that parent reach a group like myself, parents of Black children or others, to tell their story. Our stories are to be told, and we should be the author or the speaker of our own stories. We need to tell our own stories. And that is why when you reach out to us, we get your consent, because we need the data, because that is our science. The cure is in the data in order to cure this disease of racism. And we're not gonna, we don't want to be here, but we are here. It wasn't my dream to be this. I know it wasn't Carrie's, but we are here because it's a matter of life and death for our children. And that is what we're constantly preaching. But again, it's the political will to do, and who is in power and how they want to give up some of that power, and who is there, even when there are Black folks in these roles, they don't happen. It doesn't happen. I see someone, because I only see one message, someone talks about a class action. Stay tuned, because something is coming within the next few months. We're not going to sit by anymore. And for me, I want to leave space for Rohan, because I think the trauma piece of it is super crucial. I know we have our therapy fund that we provide support to parents, because we get to see the trauma, the PTSD, we get to see how it affects every single person within that household. And the Education Act talks about this. The Education Act talks about not only, if we talk about it on anti-bullying, not only the person that's receiving the bullying, but everyone who witnesses it. which is what our children, what we face the vicarious trauma every day. We get to see it. So I will stop there. I know there might be questions, but I'll pass it back to Colleen, and we'll answer questions if there are any more. I could only see a couple of things pop up here and there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Charlene, for that. I think, Carrie, do you think we should go into questions?
No, let's go right to Rohan, and then we'll do
perfect.
questions at the end.
Perfect. So next we have our next guest speaker, Rohan. He will be talking about trauma in Black students. Kiri, do you mind just giving him permissions to share his screen?
I do have permission already, so thanks.
Amazing, perfect.
Can everybody see that okay? Yes? Okay.
Yes, thanks.
All right. So so a couple of things before we get started. Just really want to shout out, big up, thank you, express lots of gratitude for parents of Black children and all the work they do. You guys are on the front lines of doing this work and really pushing the envelope, being courageous and fierce and effective in the advocacy work. And so I just want to thank you for everything that you do. I also know that, you know, so much respect for you guys that, you know, if parents of Black children picks up the phone and calls you, you know, to collaborate in any which way, shape, or form or fashion, it is a high honor. So I appreciate being invited to this conversation. Just really quick about myself. My name is Rohan Thompson. I'm a social work therapist / psychotherapist. I run my own private practice. I wear a number of different hats in the community, but for the purpose of this conversation, I'm here as a therapist. Been in the social work field for somewhere to the tune around 15 years or so. You know, I'm here to really talk about to build on the conversation that we've been having today around systemic and structural and anti-Black violence, and really to talk about sort of the mental health and impacts that it can have not only on children but adults, but we're going to focus on children. And you know, this is just really, you know, the fallout from that violence. We've spoken about the student outcomes, the educational outcomes, and such. But there's an impact on the mind and the spirit and the soul. So I'm here to talk a little bit about that today. So I love this quote, and I think I just sort of want to open with this a little bit. And it's a quote by Alice Walker, and you know, the quote, you know, is a little bit longer, but essentially she's saying that, you know, one of the most important questions in society is why is the child crying? And for the purpose of this conversation, why is the Black child crying? And I think this is really important from a trauma-informed perspective, is when we see people are in pain and we interpret them being in pain, you know, the question isn't around, you know, what is wrong with them. You know, the question is, what is causing them pain? Right, and that's the trauma-informed approach. And so I just want this question to sort of sit with us as we go through the entire presentation. Before we get into racial trauma and the impact and such, I think it's really important to sort of ground the conversation and how absolutely violent our education system is in Ontario. And what I'm just going to put up, and I'm going to go through each and every single one of them, are just articles that I just did a quick Google search on around the anti-Blackness that exists in education. And this is what our children are facing every single day. So nobody should be shocked that our children are experiencing harm and trauma as a result. And so, you know, one headline: Kitchener teacher charged in connection to duct taping Black students as discipline. Waterloo Catholic School Board called police on 4-year-old child, advocates say. teacher who wore blackface to Parkdale School, no longer employed by TDSB. High school teacher who used the N-word in class, allowed to keep work after apologizing. Blackface controversy at Mayfield Secondary School in Caledon, not the first. TDSB Human Rights Report says anti-Black racism involved in overwhelming the majority of hate crimes. Anti-Semitic and anti-Black racist graffiti found at 3 York Region schools. Police are investigating. This next one also touches to the point that teachers are also, educators are also experiencing the same violence. York Region teacher has the target of racist hate mail. Why did she find out from the police and not her employer? TVDSB investigating reported use of racial slurs at Saunders Secondary School, and Black students in Hamilton detail experience of racism, make 11 recommendations for change. And so I just need that to sort of ground us in this conversation, right? And so before we talk about, again, before we talk about racial trauma, I think it's really important for us to talk about dehumanization, because essentially the dehumanization of Black children is kind of the precursor, right? It's the gateway it's the rationale for the violence against Black children. And so, and so I want people to know about this, is that basically, the social category of children, is sort of defined as a group of individuals who are perceived as distinct, right? Is that, that they have essential characteristics, including innocence and the need for protection. We see in just about every society, children are seen as a group that requires laws, rules that protect them above and beyond, the protections that we have for adults. We also see that there are supposed to be harsher punishments, and time again, we see that these rules are not applied when it comes to Black children. Other groups do experience dehumanization, but the intensity and the consequences rise when that dehumanization it intersects with anti-Blackness, right? And so, there are different definitions out there, but I always like to start with definitions, because it kind of grounds us, like, what exactly are we talking about when we say dehumanization? And so dehumanization, and you see it up on the screen, is the psychological process of demonizing the enemy, making them seem as less than human, and hence not worthy of humane treatment. And it goes on, but the point that I sort of want to touch on here is, dehumanization, involves redefining, the targets of prejudice and violence by making them seem less than human, less civilized, right, than other people, in particular white bodies. And this is a classic strategy, where they may use terms like animals, monkeys, apes, these tropes that tend to be attached to Black bodies. And then, the main purpose of dehumanization is to get people to accept or even engage in the behaviors that they know are absolutely wrong, right? And, and when we look at some of the literature and what some of the research says about the process of dehumanization, and some of these things have been touched on in this conversation already, is Black children are seen as older than other white children. This is what the research tells us. The research also shows that Black children are seen as larger than their white counterparts, all things being equal and more powerful. Black children are seen as less innocent, right? Really key. And Black children are seen as more culpable. We see where we have data that police use of force on Black children more than any other group. And white educators, the literature shows that white educators interpret Black children as angry, not innocent, not inquisitive, not deserving of safety, but see them as angry, right? This is what the literature tells us. And again, all of this, the adultification of Black children really creates the justification for anti-Black racism and racial violence, right? So again, what is racial trauma? And so you see the definition that I have up on the screen. I'm not going to read it per se, but just about 4 points that I really want to hit on here is that in regards to racial trauma, in some individuals, prolonged incidents of racism can lead to symptoms like those experienced who are having post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So the impact is exactly the same. So this can look like depression, anger, reoccurring thoughts of particular racial violence events, physical reactions. We was sort of spoke physiological reactions, and this was spoken about earlier by Charlene. Headaches, chest pains, insomnia. Those are just some of the types of physiological impacts that can happen. But in particular, hypervigilance, low self-esteem, and mentally distancing themselves, children, from traumatic events, right? And so in today's conversation, it's about racial trauma and what comes as a result, and racial trauma comes as a result of anti-Blackness. And that's really where we're going to focus today. And often when it comes to Black children, when we see them act out, or when we see them become disinterested in school, the school system tends to ask the wrong question, ask, what is wrong, with this child, problematizes that child, sanctions that child, punishes that child. Again, if we're to take a trauma-informed approach, the question that we need to ask is, what has happened to this child? Why is this child crying? And when we ask the right questions around what has happened to the child, we start from a place of recognizing that child's humanity, right? I have this quote up from a psychologist in the United States, a gentleman by the name of Kenneth Hardy. Really love his work. If folks are any at all interested to learn more, I would suggest that you look him up. This quote, very powerful and always resonates with me, is that racial oppression is a form of interpersonal violence which can lacerate the spirit, scar the soul, and puncture the psyche. These are the type of injuries that are not seen, right, on the skin, right? It's not a black eye, it's not a cut, but it cuts just as deep on the soul and on the mind and the spirit of Black children. And so he has a model, and I'm going to speak to that model because I use that model in my practice to sort of help the young people that I work with and the families that I work with understand, narrate, put words, create a particular lens around their experience of anti-Blackness and racism. And in his model, he talks about 4 trauma wounds, and so I'm going to go over those in a bit. And hopefully this conversation, especially for those who may not exactly know what racial trauma is and what it looks like. We always hear trauma and racial trauma, but sometimes people have difficulty to be able to explain more precisely what it looks like. Hopefully, from this conversation, you'll be able to walk away with a little bit, with some more words and some more understanding, and a little bit more nuanced understanding of what exactly racial trauma is and what it looks like. So, as I mentioned, there are, in this particular framework, there's 4 types of racial wounds that Kenneth speaks to. And so the first one is the internalized devaluation. And people will see what's up on the screen, but some of the points that I want to sort of touch on is a good example of how this internalized devaluation begins very early in life is that there's videos out there. You go on YouTube and if you video doll experiment, white doll experiment, black doll experiment, and it's been replicated over the years where Black children are given Black dolls and white dolls and really ask what do they think about these dolls, and overwhelmingly the Black children speak very highly of the white dolls, and they speak very negatively about the Black dolls, and then when you ask the children which one are you, the Black children understandably overwhelmingly say that I'm the Black doll, right? And so we see, the literature tells us, by as early as age 3 or 4, Black children understand that they are treated less than because of the color of their skin. And we see that early, that Black children begin to idealize white skin. They begin to idealize white people and see them as better, and seeing themselves as inferior. And the internalized evaluation, it occurs when Black children see and know that they are disproportionately suspended and expelled more often than their non-white peers, when they aren't streamed into the academic stream, when they see that schools use police services as behavioral modification tools that are almost exclusively reserved for Black children. The internalized evaluation occurs when Black children don't see themselves reflected in the curriculum, and they don't see enough Black staff in positions of power and responsibility. It conveys the message that I am not good enough, I am not worthy of being protected, I am not of value. And so, in particular, the psychological response to this type of trauma wound is hypervigilance, right? It's to be on the constant lookout of danger and how do I protect myself, right? And when people are hypervigilant, they go into survival mode, right? And that's a very difficult place to be in, and then be expected to learn and to operate on a high level, right? On your highest level, most optimally. And so they begin this process of being on high alert and looking for ways to stay safe, to avoid the emotional pain of experiencing devaluation. And this can sometimes manifest in Black youth, in particular Black boys, really prioritizing respect, right? And they prioritize respect as a way to sort of numb the pain of this particular wound of racial trauma called internalized devaluation, right? And so the second wound of racial trauma that the model speaks to is the assaulted sense of self. And so it's cousins to the internalized devaluation, but there are some nuances to it, in that, youth ideas of not being pretty enough, smart enough, not intelligent enough, not good enough to achieve, all of these ideas begin to become very much concretized and very difficult to sort of pivot and move young people out of this particular mental model. This is the stage where they're having to contend with the continual onslaught of negative messages and images of Black people. And so this continued sort of devaluation of wider society and the overvaluing of whiteness and white bodies, it can make it next to impossible for Black children to develop a healthy sense of self, right? This can make Black children more prone to believe negative things, more prone to believe the negative things that are being portrayed about them, right? And so, we may see, interpret Black children at times of having low self-esteem, or they may not be motivated, or, and the list goes on. And that's sort of the wrong analysis on it, right? We have to ask, why is that happening, right? And often it's the result of racial trauma, right? Of racial violence, which is resulting in a particular racial trauma wound, right? This next one is a big one, right? And it's the racial trauma wound of internalized voicelessness, right? And so internalized voicelessness basically limits, reduces, erases the ability for Black children to defend themselves against the barrage, the onslaught of unwelcome, unjustified, negative, debilitating messages. Basically eliminates the ability for them to advocate for themselves, to use their voice. And so this can create an internal, a deep-seated sense of helplessness, right? The belief that things are the way that they are and that their actions can't influence any change. It's a lack of hope, right? And you imagine living, what would it be like for young people to get out of their bed every day with a lack of hope, right? It eliminates or significantly reduces the ability to advocate for oneself and to defend themselves against all different forms of anti-Blackness that they experience. And the internalized voicelessness, it doesn't mean that Black youth are silent. It means that their ability to advocate for themselves is reduced, right? And so I think I just want to sort of, last point on this particular wound that I want to make is that Black youth, they have an understanding of the risks for advocating for themselves, and many Black youth do advocate for themselves. And Robin spoke about all the different sort of movements across the country of Black students taking leadership roles and advocating for themselves. So yes, that absolutely happens, right? But there are also Black students who don't end up advocating for themselves because they understand that it comes at a cost, right? And they understand that due to white supremacy and the brutalization of Black bodies, emotionally, mentally, and physically, that they see that advocating for themselves is actually dangerous. So as a result of that, they may not speak up, and that further fuels a sense of helplessness and despair that they experience, right? And so the next racial trauma wound is really this wound of rage. And I won't go super deep into this because there's a couple more things that I want to talk about, but this wound of rage is very deep seated, and it is the outcome of ongoing intense experiences of anti-Blackness. And rage sometimes can be misinterpreted as anger. And that's an absolute mistake, because anger tends to be very episodic in nature, right? And it's connected to a particular event, right? But rage, on the hand, it's cumulative and it builds over time. And so often in my practice, Black children will come to my attention, and the language, the assessment is that they need anger management treatment. They need anger management treatment. And within 5 minutes of talking, within half an hour of talking to that child, that student, it is clear they do not have an anger management issue. What they're dealing with is a racism issue, and that's not that child's responsibility to address, right? And so these are four wounds, or a framework to think about trauma and racial trauma that children are experiencing. And so there's three more sort of points that I want to make and I want to talk about in regards to how racial trauma manifests itself. A perceived lack of agency, internalization, and avoidance. And I think these are really, really important to touch on. And so, so in terms of anti-Blackness and the way trauma plays out, it can lead to an individual's perception of lack of control, over time, right? So the literature tells us that a sense of control is significantly connected to people's stress and anxiety. And so we, as Black people, we are not responsible for our experiences of racism. We cannot consent to abuse, right? However, in the context of racism, these racist experiences can elicit or create an understandable perception of a lack of one's control over one's environment. And so this therefore contributes to the development and the maintenance of stress and anxiety, right? So it's constant, it's ongoing, right? And so, one of the things that also really contributes to this lack of agency is meritocracy. And I just want to touch on it in a little bit in regards to how it impacts mental health. And that, meritocracy would suggest that, if you work hard, if you play by the rules, if you're determined, if you sacrifice, if you're persistent, that you will achieve success, that you will be deserving of respect, and you will be valued and safe. And so this type of ideology we actually buy into, and it can wreak havoc on our sense of self and self-esteem, because when you don't achieve, right, we will look to blame ourselves. And the truth of the matter is that we should be looking to looking to the system. We should be looking to the structure. And that is what is getting in the way of our success. That is what is preventing us from exercising our agency. And so this ideology of meritocracy, helps to further ground this idea or this lack of agency that we may experience, right? It may have us thinking falsely. And so encountering frequent experiences of racial discrimination, this can create a feeling of not being valued, not being viewed as a person, having very little to no self-worth, and then it will reduce your agency, or the idea that through your actions you'll be able to create some change, right? Internalized racism. Most folks are pretty much familiar with this concept. I won't go deep into it, but again, what I'll just sort of touch on is, internalized racism is defined sort of as the conscious or unconscious acceptance of by the marginalized group of negative and critical beliefs about one's self-worth. And so, for example, having lighter skin or softer hair can be deemed as being more beautiful than Black folks with dark skin and coarser hair textures, right? And that, just many studies, have really identified that the internalized racism is linked to poor self-esteem, higher levels of psychological distress, right? And so when we're seeing these issues around self-esteem, often, we problematize or we pathologize, Black children, and really their self-esteem issues are the result of the racial violence. And so this example, or this form of racial trauma that I've labeled here as avoidance, I think this is really super key to the conversation, and so as a result of the racial violence, this particular form of racial trauma, it sort of shows up in regards to avoidance. And what I mean is that so experience of racism may contribute to stress and anxiety, right? And for Black children, so through avoidance of these things, they will begin to avoid some of the more meaningful things in their lives. And so early in life, we learn as a coping mechanism that avoidance is useful. So what I mean is, if the stove is hot, you put your hand on the stove, you burn yourself, you learn from that very moment, avoid doing that again, and that will keep you safe. So that's the type of hardwiring that happens in our brain. However, racism also causes psychological injury, and so we know to stay away from the things that are causing us the injury. And so the literature indicates that the effects or the attempts to control our emotional experiences, and that avoidant coping, such as pushing our feelings aside or pretending that experiences of racism don't exist, going back to the conversation about meritocracy, that they do not hurt or negatively affect us, that actually predicts longer term mental health issues, right? So let me say that again, is that the more we avoid, push away, or try to explain away our negative experiences, that they're not due to racism, right? That we try to suppress that it actually predicts poor long-term mental health outcomes for us, right? And so the avoidance can look like, you have children who love going to school, they love learning, all of a sudden they're not interested in school anymore, right? You have children who are super interested in extracurricular activities. All of a sudden, they don't want to pay attention to, they don't want to participate in those things anymore. You have children who love being outside and playing in the park and playing with their friends and all that sorts of stuff. All of a sudden, they don't want to do those things anymore, right? And so this is the kind of avoidance that can happen as a result of racial violence. And this is the type of trauma, that is playing out. And this type of avoidance takes many Black children and Black people away from the things that actually bring them joy, the things that would actually bring them happiness and content, and being content in life. So what can parents and caregivers do? And so, this idea around, valued living, right? And so, as much as possible, as parents and caregivers, how can we continue to support our children to that they continue to help them to do the things that they love and it inspires them and that they're engaged in, right? I think that's really, really important. We want to be able to attend to your emotions, right? And so that we have the bandwidth to be able to attend to our children's emotions, right? And so we have to be very intuitive. Children, lots of times they lack the ability in words. And so if we aren't in that mental space, then mental and emotional space, how can we be in the space to really tend to our children's emotions? A high level of compassion, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. This next one, I think for me, it's very important, and the literature also supports it. Really surround your children in Blackness and be very intentional about that. I mean, it's Black books, it's Black movies, it's Black music, it's Black dolls, it's Black TV shows. It's really normalizing Blackness, having them be around Black people, Black play dates, being around as much as possible, because there are so many messages out there that are telling them that Black is bad and Black is less than. And so if we can begin to really normalize and sort of build up and gird up our children around, this positive Black identity, it will go far for them, later on in life. Believe your children and affirm your children. And in my practice, there's a number of parents that I have worked with, and when they didn't believe their children, when their children were telling them that they were experiencing differential treatment. And it was way down the line once the light bulb sort of went on, and then they realized that their children was actually telling them exactly what time it was. There was a high level of sort of guilt and upset and shame that they were feeling because they weren't listening to their children. So I'd really encourage people, if your children are speaking to you about differential treatment, believe them and look into it, and affirm your children, right? When they come and they tell you things, affirm them, right? It's really important to understand that racism is always operating, and I think that's one of the themes that you've gotten out of this conversation. I also don't want to pathologize sort of parents and young people, because we are not the creators of this problem. The structures are, and so so collectively, we should also be turning our attention, if more than not, to systems, and some of the things that we can be demanding and calling for, is the proper use and collection of disaggregated race-based data. What gets measured is what gets attention, plain and simple. We want transparent monitoring and reporting of all data sets. And we really want the type of policy development and implementation that is going to support, the positive sort of outcomes for Black children. We need these systems to acknowledge that structural racism is a thing. It's not a conversation about proving if it exists. The conversation is about, we need to unearth what it looks like and dismantle it, right? This next piece is really important, is community partnership and community leadership. We've seen and we've heard that across the province, historically, any progress that we have made in regards to the liberation of Black people and having these systems be accountable to us is because of community advocacy and community leadership and community wisdom. And I just want to really affirm that point that has been made throughout the conversation today. And the last thing that I'll leave with, that, what systems need to be and what we need to do is hold them accountable, right? Hold them accountable. Like, it shouldn't be about, sensitivity training, right? It should be about firing, right? It should not be about, hey, the rhetoric around, hey, we're on a learning journey and we're going to try to make things better. It's about, we deal with people based off of the results. And if they're not achieving the results, the measurable results that are the indicators, then we need to be saying goodbye to people. We need other systems. I'm a therapist, right? And we understand the trauma and the mental health impact that anti-Blackness is causing on Black children, but none of the associations that govern therapists have held school boards or the criminal justice system or child welfare accountable, right, for the anti-Blackness and the mental health harm that is being caused as a result, right? And so we not only have to look to hold the particular perpetrating institution accountable, but all of the other institutions that surround it, we need to be able to hold them accountable as well. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Rohan. That was really informative, and thanks for, giving ways that, parents can really support their children while they face these challenges and barriers on a daily basis. We're just gonna hold some space for some questions. You guys can enter your questions in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask the question as well.
Maybe while we wait for questions, we can read some of the comments that people have made.
Sounds good.
So someone someone has talked about, a lot of people in the chat were talking about their own children and the experiences, and someone here mentions, Rohan, you've hit the nail on the head with the rage that rises over time, and that their son describes that. Another person says, I took a restorative practice course and learned about shame and the systems colonialism. Do you feel would contribute to anger? I'm not sure I understand this question.
Here we have some people who have their hand raised.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna unmute them.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, Rohan, I just want to thank you for that presentation. It was like very thorough and hit on some points like I was totally unaware of, to be honest. So it was like really excellent information. So I guess my only question would be if there are any links to resources available, resources like that would help with the child's self-esteem. And you mentioned infusing like the love of Blackness, the Black toys, the Black dolls, and all of that the parent can do like practically in their home. But any links or resources that you could share about spaces or books like to encourage like that self-love and that even like the healing piece, like after all the trauma, some like links to stuff about, self-healing and self-love.
Yeah, good question. So what I can do afterwards is I can pull together a small little resource list and send it back out to Colleen. And Colleen, I don't know if minutes or anything gets shared, but yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
There was another hand.
Yep, I just unmuted them.
Hi. I just want to say good evening. It's always a good thing to be with you guys. I'm pulling for you guys. You don't even know how much I pull for you, but I just want to remember Baba is an ancestor now, Owen Sankara Leach. He was part of this organization, its manifestation in Jane and Finch for 40 plus years, and he transitioned. And wherever they left off, you guys are continuing. So we're going to put that love. But what I want to say is this, as African people, we're in a protracted war, a protracted struggle. When the Arabs came, 632, and the Europeans came in 1400s, that's how long we've been in this fight. So what I'll add to this reasoning is this. We need to have a Pan-African, Afrocentric healing circle for the parents. We need to connect across Canada nationally with our parents in Scotia, Alberta, Calgary. And we need, because the digitization of connections now it make it easy. I go all the way to the continent and the Caribbean. because no matter where we live, even in our own places where the majority, we're still getting the help. So I'm just promoting that we continue with an Afrocentric, Pan-African approach to building this and continue to build it, because we have no other choice. Eventually, as I said to you guys, we want to have our own school. So for people who don't want to go into the shitstorm of miseducation, because it's warfare, we're going into a system that hates us. And so sometimes Malcolm said, only a fool sell their children to the enemy. Sometimes I feel like what Malcolm says, but we know that most of us are probably unable to homeschool. So we got to push two ways. Build our systems parallel while we're burning down the Babylon system. Because if we don't, we're going to go mad. Hear what the therapist said. So we need to have our own Pan-African, Afrocentric healing circles where we gather up and do some dub poetry and some drumming, and because we need to heal it. So we just want to say we're pulling for you guys. Even when you don't see me, I'm pulling for you guys. So keep up the good work.
I love the comment. Thank you so much. And I love the idea of the healing, sir. We're going to do that. I love that idea. I think it would be really powerful. And like we said, we want to move our next meeting to in person. And I think it would be a great thing for us to do. There was something else you said I wanted to touch on, but it's escaped me because I'm thinking about the healing circle.
It might be about the global connection.
Yeah, it
Racism
was
is
that.
global.
So, yeah, and we're trying. So we've had meetings, Charlene and I, with people in Calgary, Nova Scotia. I want to say New Brunswick, but I can't remember. But we're trying. I think the issue is that many parents they're contacting the advocacy group from those areas for support, and they're so focused on surviving and asking them to come together, especially in communities where there may not be many Black people. It's daunting for them to think about, how do I take on this work? But we're working on it. Quebec, that was the other place, Quebec. Yeah. So we'll keep trying.
Yeah, like I co-sign, everything that was just said there. But it also sort of brought up just one more piece that I wanted to mention to everybody on the call is that, there's a difference between things that are therapeutic and therapy, right? And so sometimes therapy can be, there can be barriers to therapy. Cost can be a barrier. Access to a Black therapist can be a barrier. Sometimes people just aren't willing to go to a therapist because the concept of it is very sort of white-centered and Eurocentric, and that alone will keep people from wanting to take therapy. So things that are therapeutic, is also a way to support and promote healing. So even this conversation of the healing circle, right? And those types of activities, being able to sit, break bread, hold space with Black folks. These are things that are also very therapeutic, right? The things that are sort of germane to our culture, whether it be drumming or poetry or music or what may have you, all of those have therapeutic qualities, right? So I just want to be able to differentiate a little bit around, things that are therapeutic and therapy. And if you're able to access therapy, and we understand that the issues are rooted in racial trauma and anti-Blackness, it's great if you can get a Black therapist. It's even better if you can get a Black therapist who operates from an anti-Black or an Afrocentric paradigm, right? It's really important to understand that.
Someone commented that their son avoids the conversation. How can such an individual be supported?
Yeah, great question. People speak when they're ready, right? And we have to understand that when people don't speak, it's because they're scared, right? People speak because the pain of speaking is too much, right? So we can't rush the process, right? What I would suggest that we do is we continue to affirm, we continue to love, we continue to hold close, we continue to protect, right? And we keep attempting to have the conversation while at the same time not pushing and causing people to reel or contract, to the point where, they see you as not being safe, right? So really love up, hug up, kiss up, all those sorts of things. And in time, when the person feels safe enough and the pain isn't so intense, they will begin to talk about, the things that they're avoiding.
Someone said, is there anything you would suggest to educators when they are seeing these signs of trauma, specifically with the child in the school, to help them to deal with it, or a system level takes time and this child is going to school daily? What are some things educators can do to help the student while things play on a system level?
Well, yeah, great question. And so unfortunately, it's a systemic issue, and it really does require a systemic response. But none of this is new, right? These impacts aren't new. And so, my question would be, school boards have mental health teams, right? Help me understand why these mental health teams, they don't have a number of Black clinicians and psychologists and such that can support, the mental health needs of Black children. So I'd be really turning my attention to that. And if school boards are really interested in the mental health and well-being of Black children, they would just simply they'd be serious about eliminating anti-Blackness. That's kind of the best thing. But in regards to something immediate, sort of tangible, sort of upfront, what can they do? Without knowing all the particular details, it's how can we get that young person connected to some affirming sort of activities that clearly affirm and hold up their identity, their racial identity, their cultural identity, and those are some of the things that we can achieve, we can do sort of in short order.
Thank you. So it is past 8:30. We will stay on just to wrap up and answer some of the last few questions coming in. I'm just reading through them. Are there resources for Afrocentric therapy / therapists, specifically for female students who experience racism, to reassure identity?
I see, it looks like in the chat, some folks are putting up some websites. I know that there's a website there that looks at Black therapists, right? I also know that for psychology, another sort of website, but on Psychology Today, if you type in Black therapists in Psychology Today, it'll give you a whole listing of all the Black therapists who are registered on that site as well. So those are two places that I would encourage people to go to if they're looking for Black therapists.
There were a couple of questions in the chat for PoBC. One was about information around choosing a high school for Black children. I think we had done a workshop on this maybe last year, but you can also contact our education team made up of educators who can provide some advice. And perhaps we'll embed some of that into the newsletter going forward. But if you connect with education or email us at education@parentsofblackchildren.org, they'll be able to provide at least some insight and some advice. There was a question about educators and what they could do if they see signs of trauma. Was that addressed? Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
I think we've touched on all the questions.
Someone, yeah, I think we've touched on all of the questions for Rohan. Rohan, I want to say a huge thank you so much. Rohan is also one of our, I guess we can call you a PoBC therapist for our mental health fund. And so when we have families and children who require therapeutic support, Rohan is there and accessible and giving of his time and expertise. So thank you so much for that as well. But it was great to hear your experience and your knowledge in this area for our families. And I know we'll be in touch. I think we've created Josie's put together a one-pager, and we can share that with you. And we want to be able to share it with families. So we'll be working on that, something, at least a takeaway around this issue, trauma and anti-Black racism, that we can share with families.
Thank you so much, Kiri. So I think, do we want to wrap up, Kiri, or are you gonna read some of the questions, or what are you thinking?
If anyone has any other questions for us, I mean, Charlene is here. We can answer a few.
Okay.
The chat is so lively. I can't keep track. I know I saw some other ones in there for PoBC. I've copied the chat, but I can't keep track of where we're at. Someone says, PoBC, please generate a list of schools, teachers that are more safe for our students. Charlene?
You know, our children experience shouldn't be a lottery win. The system should just work. Because people leave, right? People leave, things happen, and it can't be, we wanted the system to work. If I have to tell you, I wouldn't sanction a board or a school at this point because I'm getting problems from all of them. But I think, as much as I say that, I also say I do support anytime you could resolve or connect with your child's educator, you take it 1 year at a time, 1 month at a time. And you could also request, if you find an educator, because sometimes they teach different grades, you could make those requests. I know I have. Say, I want to keep this one. But that's so insane, the process is that we feel, but it's not safe. I'll be honest with you, it's not safe. It's poisonous. What we are working to do, and I can say this, we're doing a lot more educating of the educators on what they should do and how they should respond to anti-Blackness or anti-Black racism issues. One of the things we're pushing for, Carrie knows I've said this, if we're going to speak to superintendent and principal, we also want to speak to the students. I think the power is in empowering the students to know their rights. They bring police officers in all the time. Let's bring in some ways in which we could empower and educate the students on what a teacher or what an educator can do and say to them, and what they could do as far as hold them accountable with OCT, or even with the police hate crime unit, or how they violate their human rights. I think the power is in. Part of the shift is also educating the students on what to do. Because what we're getting to see is a lot of the students who graduate from high school and they're now going back to help themselves, their younger self. So that is what we're pushing for. And hopefully that will create a safer environment. Because if our kids know what their rights are going in, I bet you the system will look a little bit differently.
Thanks, Charlene. Someone asks, how can we support PoBC? What do you need more of so you can do this important work? Volunteer, donate. Volunteers are always great because we're stretched for resources. We've been lucky to get funding, and we have now, I think, 3 people who are working full-time in different areas, but the funding is temporary. It's like a year. It's not consistent. And so donations really help with that, because if we're getting consistent, like monthly giving, we know what's coming in every month. So donations are always welcomed and needed. because it also allows us to put the money where we know it's needed. When we get grants, we have to spend them in a very specific way. And often the grants force you to do programming. So if we're doing programming, we're looking like down like this, and we can't look up and do the transformational work that we want to, because we're focused on this grant and the reporting that goes along with that and the deliverables that go along with that. So the donations that come in from individuals and from organizations are really important. So if you go on our website, you can donate directly on our website. So thank you. And then there's another question for you, Charlene. Could you please explain the process once a system navigator referral is submitted?
So once you fill out one of our intakes, our intake form, it's 48 hours, and we either reach you by email or a phone call. My preference is send an email right away, because a lot of times I check my emails late at night and I want to set up a meeting so we could talk, so you could have my ear and fully explain what you have experienced. And my team and I will collaborate on how we approach the school board. But generally speaking, we always set up a meeting. We always set up a meeting with parents and the admins for the school, superintendent. We know we're bringing in the equity team, and I always CC the director of education for each board. A lot of times issues are solved there. It goes left based on their posture when we get there. But accountability piece, because we know the school rarely does any accountability actions, we do it. And we advise parents to do the same. Like if the actions or inactions are from educators, we suggest filing a human right, not always a lawsuit, but more so an Ontario College of Teachers complaint, because there's no statute of limitation. It stays there forever. And ideally, we want bad educators who maybe they're tired, or if they're racist, we need them out, right? So the process is fairly easy, and if it's IEP or special education issues, those we tend to address immediately, because we could literally get them in the room and resolve that fairly quickly.
Thanks, Charlene. I think maybe we'll leave it there. Colleen, was there anything else that you saw? Did we miss anything?
No, I think we covered everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for all of you who stayed on a little longer. Thank you so much again to Rohan. Robin's not here, but thank you to Robin as well for giving of your time and your expertise. I don't know, Rohan, do we have your contact details? Actually, we can share your contacts and your website if you'd like with everyone as well. But thank you everyone, and please continue to follow us, follow our work and support us, and we'll be in touch for the next meeting. And thank you so much, Colleen, for your work on organizing this as well.
No problem. Thank you, Kiri. Thank you everyone for joining.
Good night.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
Bye, Xavier.
Bye, Xavier.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question before you guys leave?
Have a good
Yeah.
night.
Yes, of course.
So I was thinking about empowering the students. Someone had said that earlier, that you wanted to have some type of a meeting with the students to give them, to tell them what their rights are. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking, why not have that meeting in September and then again in March, so that the kids are well equipped with, because usually the children think, oh, I'm seeing things, I'm hearing things. No, that's not really racism. So I think it'd be very, very important for this organization if you can arrange something like that. I could help out in some type of way if you like as well. So I think it's extremely important for them to understand their rights and know that they're not going crazy.
Yeah, access to students is critical. And I think, so there's a few things to that. So yes, I think organizing a meeting or some sort of event or something like that with kids and students in the system would be great, so that they do know their rights and they're getting it from us as opposed to police or someone else. Yeah, I think, the reality for us is we try and do it. So the way we're trying to do it now or tackle it is when Charlene and the advocacy team are going into boards. If they're meeting with boards, then the ask is that we'll meet with students as well. Definitely, I think planning, I'm always thinking about the resources. And so planning a bigger event like that requires resources. And so, 100% the advocacy, we can't do this without, we can't do it without resources. And so I think we would need to, and we shouldn't do it without resources.
Yeah.
So we would need to think about how we resource that and plan for it. But I think it's a brilliant idea. I like the idea of getting our kids together. Yeah. The one thing is we need to involve the board, like the school boards, because we need access to all the Black students. Because what happens if we do it on our own is that we get our kids, right? And our kids are getting this already anyway from us. So we need access to the school board. We want them to share the information and to.
That might be a hard call. Just saying. There is a Black teachers. It's called
NABC. Oh, NABC, yeah. But they wouldn't be able to get us the students. So I think we could do it. Like we would work with
absolutely
boards.
Through the parents.
We could do it. And we also work. So there's 17 Black organizations that are funded to do advocacy work through a student and family advocate program. PoBC is one of them. And we lead the community of practice for those organizations. And so we could tap into those organizations as well and the students that they know. But the issue is that often those are the parents that are engaged in some way. And we want to catch the kids whose parents are probably not, right? Which is why the boards, like being able to go through them to get to the kids is really important. And you're right, that's the harder part, but we could do it. I think it just requires a bit of time.
Okay, and the other really key element is getting the Gen Zers on board. So if there's like, if at all you can tap into influencers that are on TikTok or on Instagram, those guys are huge to disseminate that information.
Mm-hmm.
Just have to ask around the students that parents of the student, the kids of the parents, ask them, do you know who's the influencer in your school? All the kids will know who the influencers are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely some
need
ideas
to go through
for
them
us to think about.
because they shut down Trump, like those meetings, like these guys are really powerful.
Yeah. I think that there are a lot of avenues for us to explore, definitely.
Yeah.
Our focus primarily as we've begun this work has been on parents. But the more that we are in the space and doing the work, there's recognition that we need to reach out to our students as well directly. So we're looking at that, but yeah, definitely. So Instagram, yes, TikTok is coming for us. We have a new communications person and I know she's working on that. So yeah.
Well, I'm not doing so bad on TikTok. So if you want to go live with me on TikTok, I would do that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Excuse me. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. My name is Charmaine Crow. I'm calling from Burlington, Ontario.
Hi, Charmaine.
Been going through quite a bit with the school board for the past 7 years, and my daughter, she's only 12. I want to make this really short. you can see I'm very emotional, so it's still pretty raw. But I really, at this point, this is the first time I'm finding you, and I'm glad I clued in, because a lot of what was said, I'm glad I was able to join, because everything that was said just reaffirms that I'm not crazy and I'm not blowing things out of proportion.
No.
I need to know who I may contact concerning the issue I'm having with my daughter for the past 7 years out here at Halton District School Board in Burlington. And
Halton,
also
you said?
how, I'm sorry,
Sorry, you said Halton?
Halton District School Board, yeah.
Okay.
Specifically Central, where she is now. The bullying has been, the bullying, the systematic racism, it's just, there's so much. But so I just need to know who I can reach out to just discuss what's been going on, and if possible, I need some support. I'm a single mom, and I'm doing the best I can here, but you know, they can really run circles around you.
Yeah. Yeah. You are, well, we can help, and you're not alone. And definitely, like we said, Halton is one of those areas where it's we've called it a region to watch.
Oh yeah.
And I'll tell you, I don't even know Halton District School Board and Halton Catholic as well, but we've gotten calls, like I don't know how people get my number. I've gotten calls from like educators, from people who are working in the system, from people who have a governance role within those boards, who are really concerned about.
Oh, it's off the charts out here.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're not crazy. I know that they make us feel like that, but you're not. I'm gonna drop in the chat the link. What the first step to getting support is going through our intake process. It's important to do that because that's how we collect the data. That's how we also collect consent for you.
Okay.
Once that's done, like Charlene was explaining, it's usually 48 hours or so, and then someone will reach out to you either by email or by phone. So check both and check your junk mail as well.
Okay.
And then you go from there, you have a conversation, and then they'll figure out a plan to provide support. But I'm so
Hi, Carrie.
sorry.
I'll drop the link right now in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you're never alone. Like, I don't know, we feel like that, but we're not. And you know, if you're going through it, you know that there's other people likely in that same school that are going through the same thing, you know, other Black families. Yeah.
I have to, how do I get back into the chat?
Oh, did we lose you? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay, here we go. I'm just trying to figure out this whole Zoom thing.
Can you see the chat? You can also email us. So if you email us at
Go ahead.
At info@parentsofblackchildren.org.
Okay.
We can send you the link. So we
I'll
can do
do
it that
that.
way as well. But it's really important to, sometimes people will email us and then they don't fill out the form, but the form is what triggers the support. So if you you need to fill out the form as the first step. But
okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry you're going through that.
I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
And this stuff has been going on for years. So I just I think what it is that I'm 50 years old. I have one child, she's 12. I'm a single mom. And I just, what sickens me is that the same stuff that I seen going on years ago is still happening now. And I think that's the part that I just can't accept it. It's not okay.
What you're saying and that story is my story. I remember sitting in the principal's office with my mother because you never go to these meetings alone, and my husband couldn't come. And I went with my mom, and my son was 7 at the time. And I'm looking at my mom talking and advocating for her grandson in the same way that she did for me at the same age, around the same
Yeah.
issue. It's unacceptable,
It really is.
So yes, you're not alone, and we're here. Yeah.
I'm really grateful for this meeting tonight that you all organized, and I'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you. Erica
And my
says in
name
the
is.
chat, we cry with you, sis, and we hold you up. And that's right. We cry with you and we're
Thank
here
you.
for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Carrie, I was just hoping to speak on the ones. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of, Elevate Black Business or whatever, but I'm looking forward to supporting the Black community and things like that. And I kind of was blown away by your performances and this meeting here tonight. So I just wanted to say, fantastic, good job on you guys. And looking forward to connecting with you guys on the ones on another different date to talk about your organization and things like that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I saw your chat. Yeah, email us and we can do that. Yeah, for sure.
I'll leave you with my email as well, and then we'll just go forward from there. So I really appreciate you, and you guys have a good night.
Thank you so much. Givens, can you grab that email once it's in the chat?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I think I saw a hand. Is that Tammy?
Thank you. Good night.
Sorry, I earlier I'm just learning about your organization. I'm from Burlington also, and just had a few meetings with the Halton District School Board for my own son, and I just wanted to share with her the social worker that I was able to connect with to help me through that process. Now understanding that your agency, this is what your organization does. So sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. And I'm glad you found us.
I know she was very, she had like a meeting within a week and stuff. So I don't know even if your organization wants to connect with her either, but she was very,
I'm
very
glad
strict.
that worked out. Yeah, I'm glad that worked for you. That's great. And it's good when there are people within the system that can provide support for sure.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. So while we're still here, does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, great.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
And it's completely different than the other questions that have come up, but is PoBC an official nonprofit that has a BN number?
Yes, we do. We're a registered nonprofit, and we're in the process of becoming a charity. So we're not a charity yet, but we're going through the application process.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Carrie. I had a question about the class action lawsuit. When can we expect information around that?
Oh, goodness. So we're talking to lawyers right now. We're at the very early stages. So I would say it'll be likely a couple months or more. We've shared with them some of the statements that we've received, and they're in the process of kind of categorizing them. Because in order to file the class action lawsuit, they have to figure out what class it's going to fall into. And that typically means they can't just file it for anti-Black racism as a whole. They have to look at specifics. So is it around suspensions? What's it going to be? So that's where the discussion is at the moment. But we're definitely looking, and also who is the suit targeting. So that's where the discussion is being held at the moment. So it'll be a little while. But as soon as we have more information, we will share. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello, Kiri. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good evening. My goodness, it's such a great conversation that we had here today. I think this is my second time attending something like this from your organization. I'm really very happy that you're doing this great work. I do have a question, and it's, I don't know, I just feel sort of embarrassed saying it because this is recorded. Is it possible? Can the recording be stopped? I don't know.
We can stop the, yeah, we can, I
Thank
think
you.
we did already. Did we?